The idea that a school board of 90,000 students would have absolutely any idea what Timothy and Park Hill needs is ludicrous. Yeah. Of course, no matter how smart, no matter how good those people are sitting on that school board, they can't know what one individual child out of 90,000 needs.
Trying to get our kids back into school after so much COVID closed down, but who knows the most? Luke Ragland from Ready, Colorado. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Hey, before we get into that, I want to talk about paying Tay, because I know that having your gift list at Target isn't enough for an elected official. We need to pay school board members like Tay Anderson. What is this bill?
Yeah, so, in the biggest crisis that we've ever faced in education's history, schools closed, school boards across the state failed to do their number one job, which is to
educate our kids.
To educate
My
kids,
kid.
To get the school open. And in response to that, Colorado Democrats have decided that the thing to do would be to pay those school board members for that failure. So there's a bill in the legislature, House Bill 1055, that would pay school board members. There's no limit on the amount they can be paid. And they're not subject to the same ethical obligations that other state employees and elected officials.
Actually, Amendment 41, the ethics law, says school board members don't count. So you could give them as many gifts as you want, which is important for Tay Anderson because he's asking for gifts. And now they could get paid if this passes.
That's right. And so, resources that could have gone toward teachers or extra services after COVID to kids can now, if the bill passes, it's still working its way through.
Now, I'm teasing Tay Anderson, but is he involved in this?
He is the prime supporter of it. So he came and testified in committee. His political consultant came alongside of him to testify about the need for both him and future school board members to be paid.
This is happening actually in a symphony right now, in that the progressives want a full-time legislature. They want staff members, even who are part-time and temporary, to have full-time benefits. They really want to recreate a California-like, Washington, D.C.-like political class that are completely separated from working people. Their job is to be our overlords, not what Colorado is used to, which is people giving part-time of their lives to be in government.
Yeah, I think if you think about how the Colorado legislature should work at its best, is people live in the real world, do real things, are connected to their communities, come to Denver, maybe solve a few problems that need to be solved, but then go back to their real life. And a lot of these types of things are about changing all of that, which is to make it a full-time professional job to be a politician.
Just about why it's been so cool. Growing up here, you go down to the Capitol and you see 3 state senators in an office the size of somebody's walk-in closet, and they share one aide and a couple volunteers, and these are the people who are part of your community. They're not like Washington, D.C., that have a staff of 20 and all those people are unpaid. And we also have we did until the Supreme Court said 120 consecutive days, or calendar days don't mean consecutive, and now we can have a year-long session. But also you had this time period, which meant you go back to your farm, you go back to your job, you go back to the company. I'm really worried that we're building a full-time political class.
I think that is the goal, and I don't think that's actually necessarily even controversial that that's the goal. And if you take it back to the school board members, school board members, if there was ever a case for somebody connected to the community that's doing a part-time volunteer thing to oversee a school district, that seems like what it should be. The idea that people elected to the school board should be full-time, professionalized staff,
if that's the case, then do it exactly the way that county commissioners do it. They don't have a county manager. They don't have a city and so you don't need a superintendent. If you're going to have full-time board members, that can be their job. Hey, let me ask you about charter schools. Charter schools, something like 13% of all kids now are in charter schools.
16%.
16 now.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah, it grows every year.
We're really proud of that here at Independence, because just like Tabor and our flat tax rate and term limits, the charter school movement really started 25 years ago here at the Independence Institute. and it keeps expanding, so it's time to close it down.
Yeah, that's right. So Colorado's charter is just at the basic, or extremely successful. If you thought of Colorado charters as a public policy experiment, across the country and looked at it, you would consider it an unmitigated success. 132,000 kids are in charter schools currently, 16%. The performance among every subgroup is better than the traditional public schools.
In aggregate, there are certainly schools that don't do as well as others.
Exactly.
Which is what happens when you have choice. But that school that doesn't do better academically might be the right school for my kid if my kid is scared to go to school or physically threatened in the regular school or needs some sort of special attention.
Even better than that, if they don't do those other things that you described and they're not providing great academics, guess what happens? It goes away. Charter schools being schools of choice mean that they only exist if parents want them. And so that fundamental lesson is what I think causes their success. The U.S. News and World Report came out with top 10 high schools or top 20 high schools this week in Colorado. 9 of the top 10 are charter schools, and 10 of the top 10 are schools of choice. The only other one is a D'Evelyn in Jeffco, which is basically a charter school under a different name.
Well, Dave D'Evelyn was the founder, along with John Andrews, of the Independence Institute.
There you go.
All right, so tell me about this bill. We're tight on time, so tell me about the bill.
House Bill 1295 by Representative Jen Bacon and Senator Tammy Story from from Denver and Jeffco, respectively, would change the standard of review when charter schools have a dispute with their local school district. And in Colorado, local school districts authorize the vast majority of charter schools, meaning this bill would really undergird or upend the existing framework that we have, which is based on one thing. The State Board of Education, whenever there's a dispute, is tasked with answering what's in the best interest of the students. Okay, that's the current standard. This bill would eliminate that best interest of the student standards and create a rebuttable presumption that the school district was right if they met a few criteria.
And the woman who is pushing this, the state legislator, is actually on a school board.
Yep. So Jen Bacon,
where she lost one of these appeals, and so she wants these appeals not to be easy.
Representative Bacon also sits on the Denver Public School Board. They just tried to stop the opening of a very, very high-performing charter school in Denver. The State Board of Education reversed the Denver Public School Board 6-1, bipartisan thing.
What bill is this, real fast? What bill number, and where do you need people to help?
House Bill 1295. You can go to saveourcharters.com. Sign up, you'll receive alerts and figure out what to do next.
All right. But just to wrap this up with this woman, I thought there was a conflict of interest if you're on this organization and you're in this organization, which is why usually the guy who's president of the United States isn't also a senator and isn't also on the Supreme Court and also not a governor of a state, because they all have different roles. This woman actually gets to play both sides of the fence. And if the pay-tay bill goes, she can double dip and get full-time pay for both.
Jackpot.
Nice.
And not only is there a potential conflict of interest, there is an actual conflict of interest. She wants to close this charter school, DSST Knoll. She's tried her best on the Denver Public School Board. She's failed under the current law, so now she's trying to change the rules of her game, wearing a different hat as a state legislator.
Knoll?
DSST.
Tell me about this one.
DSST Knoll is a middle school in far northeast Denver. It was the #1 performing middle school in the state of Colorado for low-income kids. Literally the very best middle school in the state.
This is a charter school.
This is a charter school.
And it's for poor kids? I thought charter schools were only for rich guys.
Yeah, it's this school particularly, over 90% students of color and low-income kids. So
it's always amazing that still, after 25 years of charter schools, people think that charter schools are somehow private, that they're not government schools. And so here's this school that's doing a great job for the underserved in Denver, and she doesn't want it to expand?
So she didn't want it to be able to open a high school, which was already on the plan. When they initially approved the school, they said, and you can open a high school. They tried to block that expansion to open a high school. Again, this is the #1 performing school in the entire state, effectively. And they tried to block it under a pretense that it would sort of hurt the traditional schools. And her bill has a line in there that says they can have a better way or easier way to block a charter school if it impacts the enrollment of the traditional schools in the district. So literally, the more popular a charter school is, the more parents want to go there, the more authority a school district would have to stop it.
You can only make this up in government. So people want it, so there's actually more authority to stop it.
That's exactly the thinking.
I think about in Jefferson County, something like Golden View Classical, which has, I think, around 600 kids, and the waiting list is even longer than that. You have these kids who are dying, these families who are just waiting for their opportunity to get their kid into this school, which they feel will do better for that guy, and they can't. They can't.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm an all of the above guy. Right. If you want a traditional public school for your kid, great. If you want a private school, great. The idea that...
Well, you can afford a private school because you work at Ready, Colorado. Those of us who work at the Independence Institute, my kids have to go to the government institution.
Yeah, but my point being, wherever the kids would be best served, the idea that the government is going to stand in the way, stand between that school and that child, is just morally wrong. And I think the fundamental concept around school choice, whether it's going to a traditional public school that you want to go to, a charter, or a private school, the idea that we're going to block the ability of kids to go there, because money is really meant for students, not systems. We don't fund schools as a jobs program. We fund schools to help children. And if you have that sort of fundamental concept in mind, the idea that we would stop a kid from going to the school that's best for them just doesn't make sense.
Does this bill have a shot of passing? I wouldn't ask that in any other year, but this year, the crazy is now the norm down at the Capitol. We have this safety valve. So if your school board hates charter schools, there has to be some place to go and to try to override it, to do that. And we have that in Colorado, and it's been limited. This would really upset the ability for parents to escape a bad school board.
Yeah, so a school could be a new school that wants to open to serve kids in a special way, could be denied without much recourse, or an existing school could be closed or non-renewed without much recourse. And so the risks are dire. This bill presents a sort of fundamental challenge to the concept of chartering that's been so incredibly successful in Colorado. And I think, will it die? Your question, the sort of bottom line, it's up in the air. I think that it's an actual risk, and I would say go to saveourcharters.com, sign up, get involved, because I do think there is the ability to kill this thing in the first committee if there's enough public pressure and attention paid to it. But it only does if that only happens if people stand up and do something about it.
You understand the public choice theory problem we have with this, which is, and I see this in property rights issues all the time, is that a county, a city is running over somebody's property rights, not allowing them to develop their mineral rights, telling them they can't expand their building, or telling them they have to be forced into some sort of historic district, ripping away what they have, and they fight it, and they fight it, and they fight it. And at the end of the day, after all the court battles, either they win or they lose, but they're sick of it. Mm-hmm. And so their fight is gone. And so the next guy comes, and it's not like the bureaucrats have changed, but the victim has changed, and the guy who's been through the system, either successfully or not, he's not going to give money, he's not going to give time, he just wants to get on with his life. As somebody who's, my older daughter is finally getting out of government-run schools, and I've been fighting them for years, and afterwards it's like, hey, do you want to come down and come down to this meeting and fight the school district? It's like, my kid's gone. Right. But the bureaucrats and the union and the operators, they're still there. So there's a reason for them to keep fighting, whereas parents, they have those 12 years that they might want to fight.
Something like only 20% of voters have public school-age children. So there is a major problem in that parents aren't the biggest part of the voting bloc. So parents are powerful and they're motivated while they have their children, rightfully so. But yeah, the bureaucracy, this is a 24/7 thing for them. This is a perpetual entity. And the other thing I think that I would point out, this bureaucratic churn and the difficulty it is we put on charter schools, we miss things that we'll never see. So maybe there's a teacher somewhere who has a wonderful idea to serve students in a new or innovative way. And the more difficult we make it, the more impossible we make that goal to achieve of them opening their school, we lose the innovation side of charter schools. The more bureaucratic it is to open and maintain charter schools, the more barriers to entry there are, the less innovation we're going to have. I love this idea of permissionless innovation, where you don't have to ask for permission to do things. Think if our education system operated on a sort of permissionless basis. What if we allowed educators and students to work together and find things that they wanted? We could have all sorts of schools, models, types, locations, structures that we could never imagine, frankly, because if you really unleash that creativity, my belief is you'd see a lot more.
Let me flip that and say, imagine everything else in your world that had to become permission-based. So when you and your doctor wanted to try a different drug, you needed to go to a committee and see if that was okay and get permission. Imagine for every company that wants to put out a new product that they need to go out and ask permission. Well, I guess you see that in the pharmaceutical world, which is why it takes 12 years to get a drug to market and people die during it. But could you imagine the software engineer having to go and get permission? So in all those aspects that work for us in life, it's permission-free. Mm-hmm. In all those aspects that are killing us or taking away our kids' future, it is permission mandated.
Yep.
And it just what part of your life would you want a school board to run? I mean, what other part of your life do you go, man, those are the guys I want to have control over my family and the most important part of your family?
Yeah, and maybe if they got paid a lot of money, John, they would be good. No, the answer is no. I mean, school boards, I appreciate the people who serve on school boards. It's a thankless job. But the idea that local control is resided in a school board is a ridiculous thing. Many school districts in Colorado have 30, 40, 50, some even 90,000 students. The idea that a school board of 90,000 students would have absolutely any idea what Timothy and Park Hill needs is ludicrous. Yeah. Of course, no matter how smart, no matter how good those people are sitting on that school board, they can't know what one individual child out of 90,000 needs. And, the idea that we're going to push control and decision-making purely in that body is just flawed from a very basic point of view.
We sing the song that I continue to sing, but no one seems to care. The left hates the poor. The left abuses and exploits the poor. The left is racist. And I look at it, and if you want to go to a good school, you can, if you're rich, go to Kent, go to Ragland,
mm-hmm.
Go fine,
sure.
Go do that. Or maybe you can afford to live in Boulder, or you can afford to live in Cherry Creek, that have, on average, better schools. You're a poor guy, and you're living in an apartment in Denver, and you work in the food industry. What choices do you have? Maybe you can get into that charter school that is trying to be closed down. You don't have that mobility. If you don't actually have a car, you can't even bring your kid to a school mm-hmm. of choice. That all of this hurts poor people disproportionately. And I know that folks on our side of the fence don't like to talk about mm-hmm. The justice issue. I think it's time we start talking about the justice issue. And the way that government run, one-size-fits-no-one education is some of the most unjust, anti-poor, racist policies the nation's ever come up with.
Well, I mean, anytime you hear somebody on the left talking about segregation and the long-term impacts of segregation, those are typically the same people who will defend a school system that's based purely on housing location. Right. That you have to go to that public school that is zoned for your neighborhood and nowhere else.
Could you imagine having to go to only the doctor that's in your area? You have one doctor in that area, that's where you go. That's Soviet style. That's how we do education.
I mean, it really is in the sense that doctor then would also work for the government.
Right.
And so I do think you're right, that folks on the right need to look at the school choice issue in particular as a justice issue, to embrace that. The hypocrisy is what really irks me, though, which is Joe Biden. He is the most anti-charter school president in American history. Now, charter schools haven't been around that long, to be honest, but it's clear to say that he is the most anti-charter school president in American history. And if you look at where did he send his kids, he never attended a public school himself, and none of his children ever attended a public school either. So they were all private school educated, a Catholic school.
Yeah, but his president before that, Obama, not only sent his kids to the fancy private school in the District of Columbia. He also ended the voucher program that allowed in District of Columbia poor, mostly African American families to send their kids to a private school. So again, what's racist? So the president can choose a private school while he takes away private schools for poor black families. I don't know why people aren't yelling about that on the left.
Thankfully, a lot of people are yelling about it, though. So
On the left?
You know what? There was a Nebraska senator, a Democratic Nebraska senator. Nebraska right now is considering private school choice programs. And this Democrat from Nebraska stood up on the floor and said, I will vote to stop schools choice in Nebraska as soon as everybody in this chamber sends their kids to the schools in my district, which are not very good. This legislator is a person of color, this Democrat. He called the question. He finally said, if you're willing to send your kids to these schools that are in my district that are no good, then I'll vote against this school choice proposal. And to me, you're seeing little wrinkles of that all around the country.
Yeah.
You're seeing school choice advancing all across the country this year. The lockdowns have shown people that school districts aren't necessarily responsive primarily to parents. They're responsive primarily to school boards and elections. And maybe people think that's a good idea. I would argue the pandemic showed us that being responsive to parents is more important than being responsive to an election outcome.
Well, there's a risk issue. Seeing this up in Boulder Valley School District, let's not take any chances. Let's just close down the education so that nobody can get COVID, and therefore my son, who missed a year of school because for a kid with his condition Downs, online education is no education at all. It was useless. For the better part of a year, no education. But we're just going to keep it closed and safe. And the downside is all these kids from 1 to 12, like a pig and a snake, are going to go out into life a year dumber than everybody else. But that's not going to be the school board's problem, because that's in the future.
Sadly, that's a rational decision that they're making. If you look at the incentives that a school district has, it's to appease those that help them win elections, and that's the teachers union. And so the rational decision for that school board was to keep things closed, because if parents are upset or don't have, or want to try to leave but don't have the money to do so, that doesn't really hurt the school district. Now, if you contrast that with public charter schools, which are public schools, but again are schools of choice, meaning they only get money if parents choose to go there, or private schools, which obviously parents pay for, those schools were largely open during the pandemic the entire time. I was looking at elementary schools for my daughter, and every Catholic school I wanted to tour was happy to show me around and show me how they were dealing with COVID and getting kids back, but I couldn't even get in or really even get a call back from my local Denver public school. They just weren't interested. And I think that tells you everything you need to know.
I remember sitting down, this was a couple decades ago, I think, but it was when Milwaukee had a few years of their voucher program.
Yep.
And I was sitting down I was having lunch with the superintendent of the public school district. And this is probably 6, 8, 10 years into the program. He said, oh yeah, vouchers have made our schools a lot better. And I said, you mean they made the private schools a lot better? He said, no, John, they're making our schools better. And he went on and said, now we actually have to tempt parents to send their kids to the government school, which means in our neighborhoods, we have principals going and knocking on parents' doors and selling them the benefits of their school, and they've had to change their curriculum to better fit what parents wanted. And the idea of a public school principal knocking on my door saying, hey, I understand your kid's going to go to school next year in this grade. I think our school would be perfect for him, and here's why. You have some time to talk about it?
Yeah.
Could you imagine? And so when he said it took our government schools and made it better. Hey, let me ask you one more thing before we go. There was a bill on safety coming through, and I want to know what happened to it. The idea is that you have to send your kid to this government institution, and sometimes it's not particularly safe. So sometimes the police need to be called. There was a bill that said, yeah, you can call the police. they just can't do much when they get there. What was that bill?
Senate Bill 182. It's an important story, actually, even back thinking about the charter bill and the impact that the public can have on a bill. This bill would have basically eliminated the ability of law enforcement or ticketing or courts to be involved in anything in a public school underneath a felony. And if you look at what would have basically been allowed or could not have been involving law enforcement, is things like unlawful sexual conduct. It was things like assault. It was things like major thefts, drug crimes.
So if there was a drug crime or an assault at my kid's school, if this passed, the cop wouldn't be able to come in and make an arrest?
Couldn't be involved in any way, shape, or form. This is a radical, crazy idea, but this is a good news story.
First of all, we need names on this, because as our state is turning into a socialistic, progressive crazy land, who wanted this?
Representative Leslie Herod and Senator Janet Buckner. You know, to her credit, Senator Janet Buckner ended up basically killing her own bill. And the reason was because the public stood up and said, this is not okay. And so thinking about this charter bill that we discussed before, I don't want people to feel helpless out there. Stand up, speak up, do something about it. There's a lot more power that people have than they realize if they're willing to stand up. But if we don't, and we just let all this stuff happen, it's coming back next year and they're going to pass it.
So the shooting that happened at the King Soopers in Boulder happened in my King Soopers. People I know were affected. A person I know died. It was really an awful thing. The shooter had a misdemeanor assault conviction. That wasn't. And you're telling me if that had happened in a school and this had passed, they would not be allowed to come in and arrest that guy.
Yep. And again, we're talking about high school kids. We're talking about 17, 18-year-olds potentially assaulting or unlawful sexual conduct, indecent exposure, things that the police need to be involved, not only for the safety and well-being of all the rest of the children, but for that child's well-being as well.
So this is just part of the new I hate the cops movement?
I think it's policy making by talking point is what the problem is here, which is they say there's a school-to-prison pipeline, and so we're going to stop that. I don't want a school-to-prison pipeline. I don't think that's a good thing, but just sort of trying to wave a magic wand and say the school-to-prison pipeline is over as of today, that's not how the real world is. And unfortunately, I think it's people spending too much time on Twitter, not enough time in their statute book.
Ready Colorado does a lot of important work on educational choice and educational freedom. People ought to get involved. Where do they go? Yeah,
readycolo.org. That's our website. You can get updates on things that we're working on. We have special projects like the charter school thing that I mentioned. You can go to saveourcharters.com to learn more about that specific issue. We're on Twitter and Facebook, and we're always raising trouble everywhere we go.
You do great work. Keep it up.
Thanks, John.
If you enjoyed that conversation, by all means, click one of these other great programs. We have the best conversations with the most fascinating Coloradans. And subscribe to our channel. Just click down below and hit that little bell button too. You don't want to miss a single show.